First reading is taken from Kings, chapter 18, verses 1 to 15. That can be found on page 359 of the Bibles. After a long time, in the third year, the word of the Lord came to Elijah. Go and present yourself to Ahab, and I will send rain on the land. So Elijah went to present himself to Ahab. Now the famine was severe in Samaria, and Ahab had summoned Obadiah, who was in charge of his palace. Obadiah was a devout believer in the Lord. While Jezebel was killing off the Lord's prophets, Obadiah had taken 100 prophets and hidden them in 2 caves, 50 in each, and had supplied them with food and water. Ahab had said to Obadiah, "Go through the land to all the springs and valleys. Maybe we will find some grass to keep the horses and mules alive, so we will not have to kill any of our animals." So they divided the land they were to cover, Ahab going in one direction and Obadiah in another. As Obadiah was walking along, Elijah met him. Obadiah recognized him, bowed down to the ground, and said, "Is it really you, my lord Elijah?" "Yes," he replied. "Go tell your master Elijah is here." "What have I done wrong?" asked Obadiah, "that you are handing your servant over to Ahab to be put to death? As surely as the Lord your God lives, there is not a nation or a kingdom where my master has not sent someone to look for you. And whenever a nation or kingdom claimed you were not there, he made them swear they could not find you. But now you tell me to go to my master and say, 'Elijah is here.' I don't know where the Spirit of the Lord may carry you when I leave you. If I go and tell Ahab and he doesn't find you, he will kill me. Yet I, your servant, have worshipped the Lord since my youth. Haven't you heard, my Lord, what I did while Jezebel was killing the prophets of the Lord? I hid 100 of the Lord's prophets in 2 caves, 50 in each, and supplied them with food and water. And now you tell me to go to my master and say, 'Elijah is here.' He will kill me." Elijah said, "As the Lord Almighty lives, whom I serve, I will surely present myself to Ahab today." This is the word of the Lord.
Morning, everyone. It's Father's Day today. Now, I know that can be quite a difficult day for some people, but I got a lovely card from my daughter this morning, which I just thought I'd read the front cover to you. Father's Day rule number 1. If at first you don't succeed, try doing it how Mum told you to do it in the first place. There you go. Right, so for those that don't know me, my name's Steve and I'm part of the team in the benefice. And my house, and Bridget's house as well, is up the lane up there. It's halfway between the church and Bury Court. It's the old farm manager's cottage. And Bridget and I feel really blessed to live there. But it's probably one of the highest points in the village. And it does have wonderful views towards Froyle and then beyond to Alton. But it has one disadvantage. When we've had a few days of wonderful warm weather like we've just had, I often know when everyone is watering their gardens and the paddling pools are being filled, because our water pressure drops, sometimes to virtually nothing at peak times. It can be really inconvenient, just like it was yesterday morning when I was in the shower. Now, in England's green and pleasant lands, we ordinarily take our water supply for granted. But who remembers the summer of 1976? It was an exceptionally dry year leading up to the summer, and then we had 15 consecutive days with the temperature somewhere in the UK over 32 degrees centigrade. So reservoirs were so depleted that flooded villages in the valleys were reappearing. We were doing all we could to preserve our precious water supply. There were hosepipe bans, bricks were being placed in toilet cisterns, and in some areas there were standpipes rather than water straight into our homes. But that's the only example I've ever experienced of a really serious water shortage, one which I think really measured up to a drought. So a typical definition of a drought is a period of time when an area or region experiences below normal precipitation. But that definition can be taken further, and that simple one I've just given is referred to as a meteorological drought. There's also a definition of an agricultural drought, when the amount of moisture in the soil no longer meets the needs of the crops. Or there's a hydrological drought, when the surface and subsurface waters are below normal. And when all of these combine, it is described as a socio-economic drought, when the water supply is unable to meet human and environmental needs. So in our reading on Elijah, after this, in that reference to the drought, after 3 years of drought, Israel would have been experiencing a socio-economic drought. It would, in all likelihood, have been like the droughts in Africa, which the headlines often refer to as biblical droughts. I can recall as a young child the terrible images on the television of the bloated stomachs of the starving children in the Biafran drought in 1967. And then there was the Ethiopian drought in the mid-80s, which inspired Bob Geldof to launch Band-Aid and then Live Aid. I imagine that this drought in Israel must have been similar to those two examples. It would have been a desperate time. But let's remind ourselves how that situation arose. So last week, David introduced this series on the prophet Elijah. He was a Tishbite from Tishbe, a man later described in Kings as having a garment of hair with a leather belt around the waist. Other than this, we know little about Elijah's background. But despite us knowing so little about his background, through his actions, he is regarded as one of the greatest prophets, one who stood for God in the face of incredible opposition, one who has been described as proving that God plus one is a majority. So Elijah is in the northern kingdom of Israel, which is ruled by Ahab. So in chapter 16 of 1 Kings, Ahab is described as doing more evil in the eyes of the Lord than any of those before him. He married Jezebel, the infamous Jezebel, and with her influence, they began to serve Baal and worship him, building a temple in Samaria and an altar for Baal and the poles dedicated to the goddess Asherah. So no wonder he did more to arouse the anger of the Lord, the God of Israel, than did all the kings of Israel before him. So clearly, God is displeased by Ahab and all the people of Israel. So he sends a messenger to Ahab, the prophet Elijah. And when Elijah first meets him at the direction of the Lord, he pronounces that there will be neither dew nor rain the next few years, except at my word. And then Elijah disappears, and he hides in the Kerith ravine, where he is fed by ravens. But as the drought takes hold and the brook in the ravine dries up, God directs Elijah to the house of the widow and her son in Zarephath. We get some understanding of the huge impact the drought is having on the region when the widow tells Elijah that she only has enough provisions for one last meal before she and her son will die. Elijah has faith in the Lord to provide for all three of them, and he convinces her that her supply of flour and oil will never run out, and it does not. Elijah must have seemed like a godsend to the widow. But then, despite her endless food supply, and whilst Elijah is staying with her, her son dies. The widow challenges Elijah, asking him what he has against her. Elijah, showing his deep trust and faith in the Lord, stretches himself out over the dead boy 3 times, each time crying out to God to let this boy's life return. The Lord hears Elijah's cry, and he breathes again. The widow's response is, "Now I know that you are a man of God, and that the word of the Lord from your mouth is the truth." Who would not have had their faith restored at such a miracle? And this is the first instance in the Bible of anyone coming back from the dead. There is no record of this having happened before. But such was Elijah's faith and his deep relationship with God that the boy was saved. Elijah clearly had faith in the Lord. After all, he'd been in hiding on his instructions for a very long time. But again, we can only imagine how bolstered Elijah's already strong faith would have been when God responded to his pleas for the boy's life. So in our reading today, we are in the 3rd year of this dreadful drought. Ahab is desperate for pasture for his horses, although we hear nothing of his concern for the people. And he calls upon his administrator, Obadiah, for the two of them to scour the land in search of grass or water. When Obadiah is searching, he meets Elijah, and he immediately recognizes him, bowing down before him and calling him his Lord. It seems a bit of a rebuke to Obadiah when Elijah replies, "Yes, go tell your master Elijah is here," implying his true master is Ahab and not God. Now, this feels a little more than a little harsh to me, because we are told that Obadiah was a devout believer who has been serving the Lord since his youth, and at great personal risk, as he'd hidden 100 of the Lord's prophets in caves away from the murderous Jezebel. Can you imagine how hard it would have been in a serious drought providing provisions, especially water, to that many people? Water would probably have been the most precious commodity at that time in Israel, like liquid gold. Now, the name Obadiah means servant of Jehovah, and in the actions we're told of in this short introduction we get to Obadiah, we can see that he has been serving the Lord, but also in a way that possibly could be seen as compromising his beliefs. Obadiah is not a Joseph or Daniel. They had to serve another. Joseph served the Pharaoh, and Daniel King Nebuchadnezzar. But they had no choice. They were captives. Obadiah was not a captive, but unlike Joseph and Daniel, he hides his faith in a pagan nation. Nevertheless, Obadiah does secretly stand up against the crowd, and he goes against the mainstream when he hides the 100 prophets of the Lord. In his commentary of the two books of Kings, Peter Leithart compares Obadiah to Elijah and notes that both are faithful servants of God, but that they radically differ in their positions and mode of service. Whereas Elijah confronts Ahab from outside the court, Obadiah works for the preservation of the prophets from within Ahab's court. So now in the story, Elijah, public enemy number one, is back, and he is asking Obadiah to go to the king and announce this. Can you imagine how Obadiah would have felt? Elijah had disappeared. He could not be found in Israel or any of the neighboring nations. It is as though he has been whisked away by the Spirit of the Lord. And in that time, the nation of Israel is really suffering. And now he's back, and you're asking me to go tell the king? Really? Obadiah, as a believer, should have understood that it was the Lord who had kept Elijah out of Ahab's clutches. Unsurprisingly, he worries that the Lord may continue to do this. Who would want to be the one to go to Ahab, announce that Elijah has returned, raise the hope that maybe now this disastrous drought could be coming to an end, only to have the Lord snatch Elijah away again? So it could be said that Obadiah had problems with 3 F's: fear, failure, and faith. Obadiah is a man on the inside, trying to do his best, but perhaps, unsurprisingly, also a fearful man. Probably, just like most of us, his immediate response to Elijah telling him to go tell Ahab he has found Elijah is one of fear, real fear for his life. After all, King Ahab has been making every nation swear that they had not seen Elijah. He had been hunting for him everywhere. No wonder Obadiah fears for his life and why he may have questioned whether Elijah will follow through on his promise to meet Ahab. It could also be said that Obadiah had a problem with failure, almost as though the situation he finds himself in is a punishment from God. His immediate response to Elijah telling him to go to Ahab is to ask the question, "What have I done wrong?" I sense he did not appreciate that it is possible to do everything correctly and yet still have to face suffering or challenges, as these do not always come as a result of our sins. And in the midst of all this, Obadiah had a problem of faith too, of too little faith in the Lord. Given the terrible drought, though, it is hardly surprising. But Elijah's response is a wonderful promise, an oath. "As the Lord Almighty lives, whom I serve, I will surely present myself to Ahab today." This oath points to his calling and his commitment through the words, "whom I serve." He is a servant of the Lord, and he assures Obadiah that he will not leave him standing alone before Ahab. The time of hiding during the drought would have been a time of preparation in the life of Elijah. As God was judging Ahab, Jezebel, and the people of Israel, he was also preparing his prophet. Now Elijah is ready for the ultimate confrontation, when he will stand before the king, the prophets of Baal, and the entire nation of Israel. It is through his acts of faith that Elijah has been prepared to be faithful for the really challenging times to come. God has worked for Obadiah's as well as Elijah's. Not all good people are called by God to react in the same way to moral and theological wrongs, like Elijah the prophet. To some, Obadiah may have appeared a compromiser, but the scriptures tell us he was a devout believer, and I prefer to see him as an ordinary believer, fearful, scared of failing, and lacking in faith to truly trust in God and what he is calling him to do, just like all of us. So ultimately, as we will see next week, Obadiah does have the courage to overcome his fears and the faith to follow through on the commands he is given by Elijah. Despite our shortcomings, may we, like Obadiah, overcome them when we are faced with a situation of going along with the crowd or standing up for what is right and to step out in faith. A prayer. Heavenly Father, we ask that we may hear your calling on our lives, that we may recognize your voice in our busy lives, and that we may respond without fear, without worrying about failure, but it is in faith that it is you guiding our path. Amen.
Jesus shall reign.